no matter what road you choose. Your ability to ride with control depends on how effectively you manage time, space, and traction. Traction is an element common to all riding maneuvers, and managing it effectively begins by applying fundamental riding strategies. Wearing protective gear not only shields you from the road in the event of a spill, it helps prevent the discomfort and fatigue brought on by exposure. Proper posture helps ensure control. Hold your head and eyes up, and keep your back relatively straight but relaxed. Your arms should be bent with elbows in and the right wrist down. And keep your knees and feet in, and position your right foot to cover the rear brake. Continually search the roadway for potential hazards, front, sides, and rear. Predict possible problems and act to avoid or deal with them by adjusting speed and selecting and adjusting path of travel. In any riding situation, there's only so much traction available. It's a limited commodity, something that can be used up. And once it is, control is in jeopardy. The amount of traction available varies according to conditions and maneuvers. For instance, a loose surface like gravel affords less traction than a well-paved road. And a rider in a straight-line braking situation will have more braking traction available than a rider who's braking in a curve. The extra weight of a passenger or cargo and accessories also affects traction distribution and the way a motorcycle handles. To understand how traction can be managed, you need to be aware of how traction is used. The primary users are side force, that is created by steering pressure and lean during cornering maneuvers. Driving force, which is engine power. And braking force, created by wheel braking, engine braking, and friction. Managing these traction users allows you to maintain the traction reserve you need to ride with control. By holding traction in reserve, you are better prepared to manage risks and deal with the unexpected. Remember, the reserve is essential because traction is limited. The available traction must be shared by all of the user forces, and each of them has an appetite large enough to devour the reserve. To develop an awareness of how traction users are managed, let's observe a rider in a real-life situation. This rider was able to maintain control during maximum braking because he used the proper techniques and managed traction effectively. Let's take another look at this same situation and see how the driving and braking forces are controlled. While searching the road, the rider predicts that a car is about to cross his path of travel. He realizes that moving to either side is out of the question. There's traffic to the left and no alternative path of travel on the right. His knee-jerk reaction is to hit the rear brake too hard, but experience and practice have taught him otherwise. He uses both brakes simultaneously, applying a firm, progressive squeeze on the front brake lever, while applying light to lighter pressure to the rear brake pedal. He also squeezes the clutch and checks traffic to the rear. Throughout braking, the rider continues to look ahead. He keeps his eyes up. This rider's responses were quick, and his fast reactions were coupled with the techniques necessary to keep the traction users under control. Let's look more closely at how the traction forces are shared effectively in a maximum braking situation. As braking begins, the weight of the rider and motorcycle shift forward. Notice how the front end compresses, lightening the rear of the motorcycle. The weight shift increases the traction available on the front tire and lessens the traction available to the rear tire. Front traction is high, so the rider concentrates on the front brake, squeezing it firmly and progressively. And since rear traction is getting lower, he lightens pressure on the rear brake pedal. Too much rear brake pressure would cause the rear wheel to skid. Although driving force diminishes and leaves more traction available, the braking force eats into the traction reserve. And since the reserve is small, the rider doesn't attempt to make even a slight change of direction. Changing direction uses more traction and increases the risk of consuming all the traction available. So the rider continues braking in a straight line. Suppose this rider hadn't managed traction effectively. Suppose he had over-braked on the front or rear. To demonstrate the effects of over-braking, this motorcycle is equipped with specially designed outriggers that help ensure safety. During acceleration, notice that the weight of the motorcycle is shifted to the rear. The rider makes an intentional technique error. He grabs the front brake. Before the weight of the motorcycle can shift forward and produce more front-end traction, the braking force eats up the reserve and exceeds the traction available. The front wheel locks and control is lost. Imagine what might have happened if this motorcycle wasn't equipped with outriggers. To regain control, the rider releases the front brake and then reapplies it using a firm, progressive squeeze. Now let's see what happens when too much pressure is applied to the rear brake. Again, driving force takes its share of available traction. This time the rider applies both brakes, but he hits the rear brake too hard. As the weight of the motorcycle shifts forward, the traction available to the rear wheel decreases, and the rear wheel braking force quickly devours the reserve. Immediately, the rear wheel begins to skid, limiting the rider's control. But since the road surface is level and the motorcycle continues to go straight, the rider keeps the rear wheel locked until fully stopped.